You're very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup with me, Roisin the Cleric.
And me, Paul Brophy. On our debut edition of the Irish Political Roundup, we'll be paying tribute to former Carlow-Kilkenny TD, Bobby Aylward, who sadly passed away back in July. We'll be joined by some of his former colleagues to discuss Bobby's career and share their memories of Bobby. We're delighted to be joined by current Fine Gael TD for Carlow-Kilkenny, Deputy John Paul Phelan, who served with Bobby on Kilkenny County Council. And in fact, when John Paul got elected to Kilkenny County Council in 1999, he was the youngest person to do so at 21 years of age. We're also delighted to be joined by current Sinn Féin TD for Carlow-Kilkenny, Kathleen Function, who is also the party spokesperson on children and is also the chairman of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Children as well. So thanks for being here, Kathleen. And we're also delighted to be joined by one of Bobby's Fianna Fáil colleagues, Councillor John Coonan, who would have worked very closely with Bobby. And John is a councillor for the Kilkenny City area. And last but without least, we're joined by former Labour Party Mayor and Cathaoirleach of Kilkenny, Mary Fitzpatrick. We're all delighted to have you here. So firstly, we'll just put it out there to the group, and Roisin, of course, it's great to have you here as well. What are some of your memories of Bobby Aylward? I know, Roisin, you were delighted to have Bobby as a kind of a subject for your dissertation.
I did. I'm delighted to say that John Paul Phelan and Kathleen Function took part in this dissertation, and that was the one and only time I met Bobby. But wow, he made a massive impression, and he even charged my phone that day up there in Leinster House, and I got the nicest cup of tea with his assistant, maybe the most delicious cup of tea. So yeah, I met Bobby, and I got biscuits as well, Paul.
All right.
I think I was too nervous at the time to eat. And and that is the reason why I'm here today, and we're probably doing the Zoom, was the dissertation. But Bobby, to me, was just an absolute gentleman, just like John Paul was, and Kathleen was a perfect lady. But it was really just what a down-to-earth, really good, decent human being he was. And, you know, I wish I had met him more, but just an absolute gentleman and a really sincere man as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And John Paul, you got elected to Kilkenny County Council, the same electoral area in '99 with Bobby Aylward. You know, you were working in the same electoral area. How was he to you, kind of starting off? I know you were in totally different parties, but how was he in your early days?
He was exactly what Roisin said. Like, he couldn't be more helpful and more warm. It was Bobby's first election as well in 1999. He had been co-opted when Liam was made a Minister of State, and like, he sailed away at the top of the poll. But he couldn't have been more helpful. As somebody from my background who had no family involvement in politics, he would have known my family very well through the GAA, through hurling. But he couldn't have been more helpful to me. It's hard to believe, like, that's over 23 years ago now. But all through the time that I served with him in Leinster House as well as in Kilkenny County Council. I think we had one argument once, which was more of a misunderstanding than an argument. But he was kindness personified, and actually just a very straightforward person. Like, you know, what you saw was what you got. And like, he was unusually straightforward for a politician, because often all of us, and I include myself, you know, we're thinking of other things, or we're watching ourselves. He was always looking out for others.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kathleen, you would have contested elections in 2007, where Bobby would have been elected first. Bobby, he lost the seat in 2011, but he got it back in the by-election in 2015, which he won, which was very important for yourself, because it laid the foundations for your winning your seat in in 2016. But what are your memories of kind of, being with Bobby on kind of like on the campaign trail and, debates that you see on the local radio and stuff like that?
Well, first of all, can I just say I think this is a great idea, because I've already learned something there. I didn't realise his first election was, I knew John Paul was the youngest councillor, and I think possibly holds that record. I don't think anyone ever younger has been elected to the council. But I didn't realise that they were elected at the same time. So it's amazing what you learn. To be honest, the by-election is my probably standout memory of Bobby, just because in a by-election it's quite intense in the sense that it's obviously usually only in one constituency, or maybe sometimes two or three constituencies.
By-elections, they're a funny animal in the sense of kind of like it's a cross between a local election and a referendum on the government.
Yeah.
And the whole marriage equality referendum was on at the same time, so there was a lot of kind of moving plates,
Yeah, there was, and I that in 2014 the local elections would have been May, so I would have ran in that election, and then like the by-election, okay, it was a year later, and then when the general election came, like it wasn't even a year later. So there was so many elections that a lot of us were interacting a lot more. But I would have obviously met Bobby a good bit during that campaign. I always thought I would agree with what's been said about what John Paul was saying. He was just really down to earth. He was one of the few, and I'm not just saying this because he's on the call, but I would put him into this category too, John Paul. I feel like we've actually contested loads of elections together, because we ended up being in the European election randomly together as well.
Yeah.
So there's very few people, like I remember when I was first on the council and I was the only Sinn Féin, like you don't know the procedure necessarily. So you're really relying on someone that's going to be decent to you. I think Bobby just totally was in that category. You could kind of say to him, like, oh, what time is such and such happening at, or did you hear about this? And he wouldn't lead you astray. He wouldn't kind of say, oh, it's starting at 7 if it was actually starting at 6. So
there are people out there that do blackguard as well, so Bobby wasn't one of them.
No, he just was very he was 100% down to earth. He was 100% himself, I suppose. It's the best way of putting it. Like he just, there was no sort of airs or graces about him, and you could chat away to him. He was never personal either in political debate, which is always welcome, particularly when you're in the same constituency and at for the most part you have the kind of the similar interests and the same things at heart, and we're kind of all campaigning to a certain extent for the same things locally. So I always thought Bobby was 100% decent, and I know he would have, we chatted a lot about, he would have chatted about his grandkids. Let's say when I was talking about my kids, we'd often be talking about the schedule in the Dáil and just the whole, the way it can change at a drop of a hat. And I think the best way probably to sum it up is I never felt there was any sort of an agenda with Bobby. You could just say to him, if you said to him, gosh, I'm just having the worst day ever, you just know that wouldn't go back anywhere, that he wouldn't try and never use anything against you as such if you were just being honest and being yourself. And
it's great to work with someone, even though who politically you might be poles apart, but on a personal level you can work with this person, and there's they're straight up, and they're decent.
Yeah.
That's the main kind of thing. I suppose, John, you would have been kind of in the engine room there at that by-election work with Bobby. You helped run his office. I'm sure you and the Aylward family go back a long way. I'm sure you have many fond memories of the late Bobby Aylward.
Indeed, Paul, I suppose lifelong fond memories of Bobby. Really, my family goes back to senior Bob, Bobby's dad, and Liam as well. We go back a long way. But Bobby was unique, and as has been said already here on the program, Bobby was Bobby. He never pretended to be anybody else. I remember Bobby before he got into politics, when he was involved with the Shamrocks, and when he was involved in football before he got involved with the hurling team as well. He gave it everything, and he respected everybody. And I think it is safe to say, and I think Kathleen did say, and it's only fair to say that, Bobby never said a bad word about anybody. That's for sure. He might differ in opinion. Bobby had his family was very important to him, farming and politics and sport. But he treated everybody with respect in all of those codes, including his family, sport, and the whole lot. He never hid what he felt. And another thing about Bobby, I always felt as well, if Bobby wanted to say something about party politics, and particularly his own party, he said it where it needed to be said. He said it in the party rooms. He said it at choral meetings, or he said it in his office. Bobby knew where to say and what to say and how to say it. And I think he'd be a great example to the rest of us, including me, in my life. I took loads of examples from the Aylward family, and indeed Bobby in particular, because I knew him so long.
Near the dirty laundry in public, John.
Not at all. Bobby was a big man with a big smile. I think all of the other politicians who have already spoken about him, I suppose, aptly describe Bobby. He had a big smile for everybody, not just for me, but for everybody as well. And I remember clearly in his office up there in Patrick Street as well, my grandchild Ava, she's pretty handy with drawing and that. She did an etching of Bobby. He put it up on the wall, and when he got his office refurbished, he insisted that the painting would go back up on the wall beside his chair. He had a love for children, and that's mentioned already here in his family. He really had.
Yeah,
he never did that either. The thing that you'd have to say about Bobby, he was never self-serving. I think John Paul had mentioned it earlier on, maybe Kathleen. So politics has changed today, utterly changed with technology and the way people do things, I suppose, with television, radio, and easy access of different communication ways to people. But Bobby used the one communication of being who he was, serving the public. He served them to the best of his ability, and it didn't care it didn't matter who they were, or what age they were, where they came from. But that was Bobby's style. And he had, I suppose, fervent, ideas about various matters that mightn't necessarily agree with the policy of Fianna Fáil, or indeed the government of the day as well. But he said it in a way and in a manner which left you with no doubt that that was Bobby's genuine opinion. I remember referendums, different things, the marriage referendum, and various other ones as well. Bobby gave his point of view honestly as Bobby, and people knew that, and they respected him for being genuine about it.
Absolutely. And we're delighted to have Mary Fitzpatrick here in picture, in living colour, as they say. Mary, you would have soldiered with the Aylwards, you know.
I would indeed, Paul. And I have to say now, some years ago, I met his mother and his sisters, and she was a very, very proud woman, you know, because of her two sons. But I sat with Bobby on numerous committees, and I suppose one of the
we can fix that.
Yeah. Can you unmute yourself, Mary?
Sorry?
Yeah, there you go. Sorry.
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear, yeah.
Oh, you'll hear me now.
You might have to repeat that point.
Oh, no, I'm saying what I liked about Bobby was he was very clear on his opinion.
Yeah.
We've lost your sound again, Mary.
The audio.
I think she's gone altogether.
She left the meeting, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll come back in again.
She's still there.
Oh.
One thing, Paul, I'd say maybe in the meantime as well, while we're waiting for Mary's, Bobby was a loyal, unwavering supporter of Fianna Fáil. That's for sure. Like I did say, he expressed his views where they needed to be expressed, but he was never afraid to speak out openly in debate in those areas or in those forums to say what his views were. And, you know, he was a firm believer in teamwork, really. And you could see that by the Fianna Fáil representative of South Kilkenny. He had a great way and ability to attract support and the support of the masses, both men and women, young and old, across. You'd see it when we have our meetings in Spring Hill. There was always a huge contingent from South Kilkenny. And even if there were people down the floor, and they did stand up and offer a different opinion to Bobby, he wasn't a bit afraid to say that. But it was very important that he appealed to all those good people because he was genuine about it. But he always welcomed the support of all age groups from all walks of life into the party, genuinely did. And they were attracted with Bobby's style because Bobby didn't put on a show. Bobby was Bobby, and what he said, they knew he meant it. That's very important.
I have a story, or a bit of a story along those lines as well, Paul. Roisin, it's about about more than 10 years ago. I was in the Senate at the time. Bobby had won the general election in 2007, and Fianna Fáil were in government, and there was a family in my own area who would be, you know, have a longer history than my own in Fine Gael, and a particular issue arose, and we needed to get someone in government to listen, and contact was made with Bobby on a Friday night, and he arranged a meeting very senior government minister at the time, and the issue was resolved. And I suppose the most impressive thing about it was Bobby Aylward knew that he was never going to get a vote out of it. But it was a particular difficulty that arose that had to be resolved, and he just dropped everything and solved it.
He knew it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. And it kind of epitomized him to me, because often, like, we all get little bits and pieces from time to time that we might need advice or from either fellow members of our own party or people in other parties. But this was above and beyond that, and the situation was resolved, and a potential disaster for a family was averted purely because he knew it was the right thing to do, and it kind of epitomized. You know, you'd be thinking back over different stories and different events, but it epitomized to me what Bobby Aylward was all about, really, which was trying to help people, regardless of whether it was of any benefit to him or not.
Exactly. I've spoken to a few people who would be health and disability campaigners, and it was a subject that he took a great interest in, and he was, extremely helpful to a lot of them groups, because, you know, when you're in your local TD, you get representations from various different bodies and individuals, and so I suppose it's important to kind of listen to all those opinions and views. And I suppose you'd share that, Kathleen.
Mary's back.
Mary's back.
Hi, Kathleen.
Hi, Mary.
We can hear you loud and clear, Mary.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. You were kind of rambling there. We couldn't hear you, but we can hear you loud and clear now. So.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. No, I was just saying how respectful that Bobby was to people, and he was very, very proud of his family, and his love for his wife and children and grandchildren. When we'd be at conferences and we'd be sitting quietly having a cup of tea or that, he'd be talking about them, and he was very proud of them. But it was the history of the Aylward family, I suppose, that I was very, very interested in, and that was that he had told me at one stage that his father was a senator.
That's
and
right,
I suppose that was the beginning of the political life for them, if they were used to debating going on within the household. And sure, Liam was there for 30 years. And
general, European, always got elected.
And another very respectful member of the family, and Bobby himself. But I often thought there, since he died, that must have had wonderful parents to bring them up with that mindset of respecting people for who they are, not for what they have, but for who they are. And I would have seen that when he was on the canvas trail. Now, he was in around Kilkenny there at one stage canvassing some years ago, and everybody knew him in the local housing estates. Everyone was able to identify him. He was able to identify with them. And I mean, that's a very special gift to have in a person. And when he was in the chamber, he respected each and every member that was sitting there.
Yeah.
And as you know, we all come from different parties and different representations. But it didn't matter once we were in there. We were the one group and decisions had to be made. And the last thing I'm going to say is that I have kept many, many acquaintances, and I would consider some of them my friends since I was a member of the local authority. And sure, his nephew Eamon now, isn't he still sitting in there and carrying on the tradition of politics in the Aylward family?
Yeah, exactly. I remember your former colleague, Maurice Hartle, who's a former Labour Party councillor in Comer, a fine public representative too. I remember him telling me one story, him and Bobby during the chamber one day, and had a big blaring round of roaring and shouting and stuff like that. Then we were back in Langton's afterwards, and there was a pint of Smittix on the counter, and Bobby said, "Forget that row." I said, Boris, no, I don't want. He said, "No, forget it." Then, so that kind of gives you a good idea.
That's the way he was. And I remember being down around Mullinavat, coming back from an appointment one day, and I went into that pub there for lunch, and he was up at the bar, and sorry?
Rising Sun.
Yeah, the Rising Sun.
Rising Sun. And
Yeah,
I just
Rising Sun.
chatted to him briefly, and I went down, had the lunch and all that. And I got up to pay, and they told me that's paid for. You know, and I didn't see him for about a month after that, and I thanked him for it. And he said, "Oh, no problem at all. You can catch me another day." That's the way he was. You know, he is, I think myself, he is very, very badly, sadly and badly missed down around the Ballyhale area, because the Ballyhale Shamrocks were his life.
Yeah.
He loved them hurling down there, and we're very proud of them as well. You know, but I think he will be missed. He is missed, and he will be missed, you know. So he left a lifetime legacy behind him. He was one in 1,000, really.
Yeah, absolutely. You won't see the likes of them. I suppose, John, you're Fianna Fáil councillor here in Kilkenny. On the local organisation wise, you know, I'm sure he's very, very much missed. Because it's incredible to think that only 2 years ago he was a sitting TD and he was contesting a general election, and sadly he's no longer with us. So it just goes to show how things can change so rapidly.
How fragile a human being is, that's for sure. And Mary did mention, and you're right, Mary, she mentioned the contribution of the elders, which they don't boast with. You'd hear some families and they'll be telling you they founded the earth. The elders didn't mention that to you about finding the earth. But you mentioned about Bobby. Bobby, God be good, from his dead. It was 15th of July he passed away. And I think it was exactly 48 years to the day previous that his dad, Bob Aylward, died at the age of 63 as well. His daddy died at 63. And he did contest 3 general elections and barely missed out the third time. And he was in the Senate for 1 year when he passed away. And then Liam took over. That's what happened there. But I think, you know, they left a huge legacy, a genuine legacy. And that you spoke with the Shamrocks and Ballyhale. I remember Bobby one day at a match, and I was with the man that I knew from Castlecourt, Mick Fitzgerald, playing against the rail yard. The match was kind of tough, to say the least. And Bobby and his partner, I won't name the other man, got into a little bit of fisticuffs. Now, it was kind of serious. It was so serious that the referee was a little bit afraid. But he took the 2 lads' names anyway, to make a long story short. When the game was over, Bobby went over straight away, and the 2 lads embraced and shook hands. The man turned on, Jesus, John Coon, he said, "That's sport, yeah. That's real sport." And that's the way he did politics as well. On the day when the job had to be done.
They left it on the pitch, and he left it in the council chambers. Was the argument he had with Warwick Shorts kind of proved it all.
Absolutely, because if I could, I did say something about Bobby's passing, and I think the Hall Marathon did attend his funeral on both days and was very generous, and the family really appreciated it. But he said something very nice about Bobby, which I think was very true, in expressing his sympathy. And he said Bobby was a deeply committed public representative in his community. He displayed all the attributes of a public representative, the ones that they should possess, he said: passion, sincerity and empathy, and commitment to his people and his place. He said a man of great honesty and integrity, along with being a tireless campaigner and a champion on behalf of his people. And he said Bobby loved his people, and his people clearly loved Bobby. And Bobby's door, he said, was always open. I thought that was a nice little piece for Bobby, because that was Bobby, and that was the contribution he made. It was only fair, very honest about Bobby's life. It really was.
Very accurate.
Very accurate. Yeah, Bobby, I remember Buddy rang you on Bobby's passing, and he said to me, John Coonan, he said, "I'm really sorry, you know I am, and I know," he said, "you're a great friend. But when I was mayor," he said, "I had to visit a woman down in Ballyhale or Mundabat, I forget which it was. But I rang Bobby," he said, "because he was local, to know could I go down there as mayor," he said, "because she wanted to see the chain and where the..." He said, "Of course," he said, "he can come down." So down he went. He met the good lady in Mundabat or Ballyhale, wherever it was, and they spoke and had their chat. And of course, she was delighted. And she asked him, could she go up to Bobby Aylward's house with him? He said, "We will." He said, "Show me where it is." So up he went to Bobby Aylward's house, drove up to Bobby's and into the door, got out, knocked on the door, and out comes Bobby with a mug in one hand and a slice of toast in the other. And he turned around and he said, "Jesus, mammy," he said, "you know who's at the door?" He said, "The mayor of Kilkenny. Come in, boy." He said, "Come in." Went in and sat down. And as they were sitting down with his friend, that good lady down among the bat, "Sure," he said, "you're awful welcome in this house." He said, "You're 50% Fianna Fáil anyway." He said, "You're always welcome in this place." And Paul really enjoyed that. Bobby knew what he was talking about, his father and his mother and the history. But like he said, he made him feel so well. The fact that the mayor went down, no problem at all to Bobby. He was welcome as the flowers as everywhere in that house.
And I suppose Kathleen, how important is it, to have colleagues like that in the Dáil, be it in your own party or other parties or your constituency? As you said, it's very rare that you get politicians that are, that can be straightforward to deal with, because when you're in Leinster House, it can be a bit of a bubble at times, and some people are very good and very helpful, and some people, might be a little bit more, mightn't be as straightforward to deal with, like Bobby.
Yeah, I think actually the fact that you have so many different parties represented here on this actually shows the kind of person that he was. But that is lacking. You do obviously come across people, and that's actually what stands out for me most. I often say to people, like, my first experience was on the Borough Council, and it was actually some of my most enjoyable memories, because the Borough Council, and John Coonan would know this, and Mary actually too, that like it was different in the sense that there was a sense of you kind of were all working together. Like the whole thing about what party you were in or whatever didn't really, it came up all right when there was the election of mayor, but apart from that, it didn't really kind of come up as such, and it was really, like, I often wonder if that hadn't been my first experience of politics, would I have kind of stayed in it? And it kind of comes back to personalities like Bobby, that you do need people like that it can be it can be difficult at times, and people always say to you, you need a thick skin to get involved in politics. But when you see personalities, like I would actually had a lot of very different political views than Bobby, but yet that's not what I remember at all about him. Like, I mean, I think this could have even been referenced on local radio by at the time, but like during the repeal of the 8th, like we would have had two very, very different views on that. And yet we didn't have one argument about it. And like I remember we were on a debate together, and I actually remember that on that count, Bobby was in the count for a while as well, but there was no animosity, there was no issue. It was like we just had our two different views, and it was like having two different views in a family. You could just have your view, and that was fine. And that is something that I actually think it's probably not highlighted enough in politics, that is needed, because it's lovely when you can work with somebody and you can, regardless of whether they're in your party or not. And let me say, sometimes you can work better with people that are not in your party. Like, that does happen.
That can happen a lot too.
So it's lovely. I love when you have that, because the days are long, and it can be difficult at times, and it's kind of an unusual job. Like, people don't really often understand exactly what your day-to-day role is. And I still have people saying to me, God, you're in Dublin a lot. Like, they don't really understand the whole 3 days a week in Dublin. And so when you do come across personalities like that are just themselves, and there's no hidden agenda, and there's no malice in them, like, it is lovely and it's refreshing. And I would agree with what Mary said, that he is badly missed. Yeah, and I think that's very, very true. And I also think it's, he was so young as well, and I feel that sometimes I think about, like, he didn't have a huge amount of time to enjoy any sort of kind of retirement, and with everything with COVID, that sometimes comes into my head as well when I think about how he passed away. And it's sad, very sad for his family.
He got a good vote. Just unfortunately, the transfers didn't fall his way. So of course you had a fantastic vote the last election. You topped the poll with 17,500 number ones, which is a record. So congratulations to you for that. I'm sure it's something you didn't expect.
Oh, we definitely didn't foresee that. And if anyone tells you any different, I can tell you now they're lying, because there was even an expectation that the seat might be gone. So yeah, definitely, yeah.
And I suppose, Mary, you're good for a funny story. Do you have any funny stories of Bobby Aylward and the Aylward family?
Well, there was one particular time, it was only when Kathleen was speaking there, that I remember having a debate with Bobby, and it was to do with Waterford they were looking to encroach on our lands in Kilkenny, and I was having a bit of a debate with him. And he would get kind of hot-headed, and he'd calm down twice as quick. But anyway, we just debated it and talked about it. And Billy Ireland happened to be on the corridor, and he said to me, "No, Mary, I'm telling you, the only one that ever wins an argument with Bobby is the wife Helena." And Bobby turned around and he said, "Christ, you're right there." So that's the kind of a man he was. He was lovely. He was a very nice man. A very nice man.
It's good to mention Helena too. Mary mentioned Kitty earlier on. In ways, Kitty and Helena are quite alike. In that Bob Aylward spent his life on the road between politics and hurling, chairman of the county board, and ran in, as John Coonan said, in 3 or 4 elections, and always got a huge vote, but never got elected to the Dáil. Old Bob he used to get 7,000 or 8,000 votes, and a bit like Bobby the last time, and just get pipped on the last count. And Helena, much like Kitty, kind of kept the show on the road at home, while the nature we all of us on the discussion here, know what politics is like, and when you're in the middle of it, it's constant, and you're always nearly on the road, but you do need that kind of presence, or that kind, somebody who can keep the home fires burning, so to speak. And Helena was very much that for Bobby and the Aylward family. And I have stories about my time with Bobby too, but and actually in Billy Ireland as well. It was another one that, and worth mentioning, I suppose too, that Billy's daughter has passed away after a very long illness in Ballyhale recently too, which is very hard on the Ireland family. But they were it's a good example of how Kathleen touched on this earlier. When issues arise in the Oireachtas, or indeed issues like Mary mentioned with the boundary in between Kilkenny and Waterford, party politics doesn't come into it that much, and I always felt, even though as the crow flies is only about 4 or 5 miles between where I grew up and where Bobby Aylward lived, but and you there would be an expectation outside that we should be at each other's throats the whole time, but we never were. Because time and again, when issues arose, we found ourselves always on the same side of the argument and trying to work for our own, either part of Kilkenny or our entire Kilkenny or the entire constituency of Carlow and Kilkenny. And he was always somebody who you could depend upon if an issue arose to take the fight to whoever it needed to be took to. And I think, in fairness, the boundary issue was one that really ignited every passion that was in his body, and his sense of identity as a Kilkenny person. And he was very much to the fore over many years in different elements of that struggle, which I suppose it's like forever. It'll be with us forever, that battle between Kilkenny and Waterford.
It's massive. Well,
the other thing to mention too is that Bobby's friends, and I think John Paul did mention it. One of the Aylward's best friends was Billy Ireland for many years.
Yep.
They were great friends. I mean, genuine friends. They were for Junkers years, and they really looked after. So did Billy as well. They looked after one another. That's the thing with the essence of the politics that they, I suppose, pursue. And when it comes to politics itself, you could discuss.
Unfortunately, Kathleen Funk, Sinn Féin TD has to leave us. We thank you for
thanks
taking
very
part
much
in our discussion, and we wish you the very best of luck for the upcoming Dáil term.
Thanks very much. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Kathleen, bye. Bye.
Yeah, the Ireland and the Aylwards, they go back a long way. Mary, I'm sure you have plenty of stories of both as well.
Sure, I have, but again, Paula, I keep coming back there to well, for me, my experience was local authority level, but the amount of people that sat around there and discussed and thrashed out and went out to meetings and argued the point, and then met with different parties to come back in to come to a consensus. I mean, that's not something that you would get, I think, in any other local government or even in international politics. that only happens, I think, in Ireland. And I mean, it's something I wouldn't ever like Ireland to lose. That homely part of our political life where the public can have a say. Now, again, I'll go back to Billy Ireland. We were at many as a conference together, Mary and himself, and sure Michael O'Brien and Morris Hartle. We were all there, but sure, all the elected members were there. You went to the conferences that you were interested in, and that was it. And after the conference, we'd all be friends out having a social drink and just debating different things with the conferences. And again, it comes back to the friendship. Yeah. And the people that we met there. I mean, I served with John Paul there on the local authority, or on the local authority for a few years as well. And when he got elected, I was as proud as I'm sure as what he was, you know. And I've served with John Conan there for many a year. I mightn't have agreed with everything now he said, but I served with him, and there's a few more things I need to discuss with him. But anyway. I could honestly say that I could call them all very, very respectable people, and very respectable to the females, especially, that would be sitting on the local authority. And I suppose if I had a wish, it would be that more females would come through, or that a law would come through that where it would be 50-50, because I feel females really add to the debate, and they're quite good at keeping things calm, but losing the head as well, but keeping things calm in a lot of cases.
Yeah, exactly. Because if I'm open to correction here, I think there's, of the current 24 councillors on Kilkenny County Council at the moment, only 4 are female. That's a very, very low number.
Well, it is, and I just, from my own experience, I think it's quite difficult being a mother anyway, and being on the local authority, unless you have someone there at your back to take over the responsibilities of the home while you go out to your meetings, because it's another thing. I don't think the public understand the amount of meetings that a councillor or TD has to attend. And you would often hear people saying, oh, sure, this one does nothing and that lad does even less, you know, without understanding the pressure on time for these meetings and being part of committees as well. It's not just a once a month meeting. I mean, you could be sitting on 4 committees that will be meeting once a month as well. And that's time. And people don't understand that, you know.
I think Paul is.
Paul, would you agree with a lot of that?
Yeah, I would, but I think there's only 3 out of 24 that are female in Kilkenny at the moment, which is strange, because going back to when Mary was on the council, there were 7 or 8 or 9 or more out of 26 as it was then on the full county. It's Kilkenny has a proud tradition, really, of women in politics, going back to the first ones, first female members of the council that were elected in the 70s. But the numbers have fallen. Yeah, numbers have fallen since then, and they're, like Mary's right. Like it's not just a question of balance in itself, but it's also like there's different perspectives in terms of debates, and it's something that all parties have and indeed independents have slipped back on. But I suppose to go back to the Aylward story in politics, I think, and John Coonan might correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure, was it late 40s or early 50s that Bob Aylward stood and got elected to Kilkenny County Council for the first time, which is, like, when you consider where we are now in 2022, marking 100 years of the history of an independent 26 county state. That's effectively 3/4 of the time that the state has been independent, that there's been an Aylward on Kilkenny County Council, which is a remarkable thing in and of itself. And I don't like, Liam Alyward is still a very young man. I'm sure he has further to go in politics. When I was elected in '99, both Liam and Bobby were on the council together. When I think back to those days, actually, Phil Hogan and Dick Dowling as a former TD was on it for Mary Hilda Kavanagh, who was a bit of
I think it's
an
mad to think
institution.
you could be a TD and a county councillor at the same time.
Well,
Trying to do
exactly.
it now, you'd be like, whoa.
Joe Cody was there for the Labour. He was the only Labour one that was there, but he was a good one. God rest him. But like there was very formidable voices involved in local government in Kilkenny, and we still have them, in fairness. But it's changed a bit since the dual mandate abolition came in, and perhaps not all for the best either, because that little bit of a connection between what was going on nationally and what was going on locally isn't there anymore. And I think that has been a bit of a weakness, but look, we are where we are, and the system is in place now, and I don't see it being reversed. But it was the two Aylwards in full flight at a county council meeting was a sight to behold. 20 whatever years ago, as a young lad running out of WIT to get to some council meeting. I can remember actually you mentioned at the start I was 20 when I was elected first. I was a child, but another man who's passed away, the late great Dixie Dáil, John Coonan might remember this. There was a council meeting held in Mount Juliet, and Dixie piped up about early enough in the meeting that it was Liam Alyward's birthday. And it was his 50-something birthday. I'm not sure what year it was. So I hadn't said anything to anyone. Well, yeah, he did indeed for years. But I didn't realise that I shared a birthday with Liam Alyward. So my 21st birthday was celebrated at a council meeting in Mount Juliet, and Liam's 50-something birthday, whenever that was, 23 years ago. Everyone knows my age now. But that's one happy memory that I have of my time serving with Bobby and indeed Liam and Dixie. And several of them are gone since. Going back to what Mary was mentioning about female members of the council, like one very good friend that I had who passed away again during the COVID times was Joan Murphy from Graignamanagh, who was a lovely, 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 warm, motherly type. Like, she was like my mother on the council. I can remember going in days when maybe as a student I felt a bit ill, and it might have been self-inflicted illness. I could always count on Joan for the paracetamol or the Solpadeine or whatever it was. Yeah. But that was the way, like, it's years ago now, but that was the way that the council worked, and I think still to a large extent does work. Mary's point about the warmth, how people could get on with one another and yet disagree with one another, how people could hold strong views and yet when they stepped outside the chamber could be friendly with one another. That is something that we should never lose. Even though politics, as we started this, politics is a different business now even than it was 20 years ago.
If we look at all the successes Kilkenny has had over the last number of years, through investment or whatever, it wouldn't have been possible unless all the political parties, politicians, they all kind of
work together.
Work together. And as John Paul has said there, John, Bobby was like, there was his father and his brother, and now his nephew Eamon is on the council. The Aylward name was always in Kilkenny politics. Now that's a pressure that can weigh on people. Did Bobby was Bobby weighed down by that at times, or did he embrace it, John?
Bobby lived his life like that. Bobby didn't even understand that was the case. He just lived his life like that. And I think John Paul and maybe Mary mentioned it earlier on, talking about involvement and what would help, we'll say, as being a legislator compared to what has been as a council. I think what helps the legislator, and I think it helps Bobby, John Paul and others as well, is being deeply rooted in your community. All the elders are deeply rooted in the community. They were involved in farming, they were involved in the Shamrocks. In actual fact, the late Bobby was still chairman of the Shamrocks when he passed away. His two sons heard of the Shamrocks as well. Bobby played sport as well. So the little local shop, the community shop that was set up down there as well, he was involved in, so was his wife Elena involved in that. Being involved in your community before you get involved in politics, whether at a local level, and particularly at a national level as well, understanding the minutiae of what it means to a local community as well. It does help when you're involved with your community. So Bobby was immersed in his community, and so were the others. And I think
we are very, very unique in our own sense here in Ireland that, you know, you sort of see it yourself, John Paul, that, you know, our politicians are so accessible, whereas there's certain, in the UK, for example, there are politicians that once they get elected, they're straight down to Westminster and you don't see them in their constituency till there's an election 5 years later.
We don't have anything like the safe seats that they have in the UK or indeed in America. It's the same in America. Now I know America's a vast country, but in Ireland you fight over every vote. And it might be a good, fair, clean fight, but John Coonan's point is accurate, particularly if you're starting out at local government level. Like, again, to bring it back to my own example, when people were voting for me as a 20-year-old, half of them were voting for me because I was a young lad, but half of them were voting for my parents, you know, because of involvement. And the Aylward family had that in spades. And the thing that I always was so envious about to the Aylward family was how there was one of them in every parish in South Kilkenny. Maurice Aylward, a great family friend of ours, is in my own parish of Rossburke, and he had one of his sisters in Monkine, Liam up in Hugginstown. And Sean was only over the road a bit from him. There was a large family, and there was nearly one in every parish, which was a great head start in a political sense as well. And because they were all
canvassers.
Exactly, but also along with that, it wasn't just that there was one in every parish, and you wasn't short of canvassers, but they were all involved in things. You know, they were all, whatever the thing was, like even some of his nephews and nieces were into the ponies and the horses, you know, all sorts of kind of country pursuits, but like involved in their community. And like you can't beat that. That's the John Coonan point, and he's right. You can't beat that in terms of you know, giving people an insight and in terms of elections and knowing what's going on the ground in between elections, which is crucially important.
Paul, I'll tell you one thing that Bobby told me one time, and I'll never forget it. I was introduced to politics because of the Aylward and McNally. And if I could be 1% like the qualities or have the qualities that they have, I'd be a happy person. Because Bobby said to me one day, John, he said, before I came to a local election, I wish you well, John, he said, and look at here, he said, I think you will be elected, he said. But could I offer you one bit of advice if elected? And I know you'll do it, he said. Just simply be nice to people and you won't go wrong. I thought it was a smashing statement, and I never forgot that statement that he made. And I think that was Bobby himself.
Yeah, before I go now, because I'll have to be going shortly, there's two things I just wanted to mention. And one was it was a very sad day when the Borough Council was finished. A very, very sad day. And throughout the history of the Borough Council, there was only ever 3 female mayors in Kilkenny. That was Margaret Tyne and Betty Manning and myself. And I don't know in the future will there be any more. But the other thing was a funny story, because I have to go babysitting. A funny story about Dixie Dáil. Dixie Dáil was selling a sheep or something.
Lamps. He used to
Lambs, was it?
Lamps.
And Billy Ireland and myself, anyway, we said, sure, here, we'll buy one. So anyway, as it happened, a couple of weeks later, I was to meet him in the car park in Bennisbridge, and he'd have this lamb all cut up and ready. So I proceeded, gave him the money, and came home with this box of lamb, was putting it away into the freezer, and I said, Jesus Christ, there was no liver or kidneys with this thing. And I'm very partial to lamb's liver, but anyway, I met Dixie at the next council meeting, and I said to him, come here to me, that lamb, I said, that I bought off you, it had no kidneys, I said, and no liver. And he turned around as cool as a breeze, and he'd say, I'd say that was the one was born without him now, Mary. So what can you do? You couldn't answer that. You know?
No.
Mary, just before you go, and then we'll ask John Paul and John Coonan, what would you say would be the biggest legacy that Bobby Aylward left locally and as a national TD?
I think locally his impact on people and his consideration of people around and his community down there near Mullinavat. But I think nationally it was the name, and the name meant something to people up and down the country. But his respect, I think, is the thing that we all need to learn and do. His respect of people. I had seen him sitting with a traveller group because I was at the same meeting, and he chatting away there as if he was born on the side of the road. And he has been up there in the Dáil, and he has represented Kilkenny in the highest respect. And I think what he left was respect of people and where they were, not what they had.
Absolutely.
Common decency.
Common decency. That's it.
And
It's not that common though. That's the thing.
yeah.
But it was for Bobby.
Yeah, it was for Bobby. It was for Bobby.
And John Paul, yeah. And John Paul, what would you say that his the legacy that you think he left behind locally and nationally?
I think I agree absolutely with everything that Mary said. But to add to it, I think locally, one of his biggest impacts was actually on the boundary issue, because when that was floated for the first time, goodness gracious, it was back before the economic.
And it reared its head in 2015.
It seems to come back every 10 or 12 years in cycles. Yeah. But the first time that it was raised, it was the first time that issue had come up for quite some time. And I think Bobby brought it very much home to Kilkenny people, but also to the management at the time of the local authority, the impact that it would have financially for the council, but also in terms of the sense of identity. I think that was something like it struck at the core of what he was about, that type of identity issue. Nationally, actually, his biggest impact was the by-election win, in the sense people, I think, forget. It was a time when Micheál Martin, as leader of Fianna Fáil, was under a bit of pressure. And like he's now the Taoiseach, and since he's gotten the job has performed well in it. But at the time, it was an answer to some of his critics as leader. And I must confess, I hadn't heard all the words that John stated earlier from Micheál Martin. But they were genuine words, because I think that Micheál himself, at the time and subsequently recognised the importance of that by-election victory for himself and for Fianna Fáil politically as well. And that was a by-election is a difficult thing at the best of times, but it's certainly a very unique electoral experience. And Bobby's approach to politics and his style, and also like the recognition and the name, but his own unique kind of down to earth way of dealing with people was what won that by-election for him and for Fianna Fáil and for Micheál Martin. So I think that was his biggest probably national thing, which is almost something that people have forgotten about, or even at the time didn't probably appreciate, but it was significant.
And Councillor John Coonan will give you the last word.
Yeah, thanks. I think all of what has been said by my colleagues there has been very genuine and been very honest about Bobby. But Bobby was all of those things. But I suppose in a word, I would agree with John Paul. The winning of the by-election in May 2015 turned the fortunes of Fianna Fáil, and it was Bobby Aylward turned the fortunes. It was Bobby's capacity, Bobby's personality. I remember people saying at that time, this was the old-fashioned politics. But it wasn't. It was the real politics for the real people offered by Bobby. He presented himself. He not self-serving. He was never playing to the gallery, but he won that election with huge respect. And I think just a point of that respect was the amount of people, TDs and senators and former friends that came from all corners of Ireland to help Bobby in that by-election showed the respect which Bobby was held. It showed his passion and his sincerity and his commitment to the people. And like I said earlier on, Micheál Martin said he loved his people and the people loved Bobby as well. One thing that I'll always remember in the council chamber as well, Bobby fought for South Kilkenny. He was an elected representative like John Paul, those people, but there was no doubt about Bobby's fight for the people of South Kilkenny, that's for sure. And I suppose in a word, Bobby had a big smile with a big heart, and there was room for everybody in it. We all could, I suppose, learn by that example, and I'll never forget him for it.
Here, here.
Absolutely.
That's true.
Well, we come to the close of the programme, and I know I speak for Paul. We just would really like to thank John Coonan, for a colleague of Bobby Aylward, to come on today, Mary Fitzpatrick, and Deputy John Paul Phelan, and Deputy Kathleen Function. Thank you so much indeed for taking part in this tonight.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Roisin.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Yeah.